up and say enough has been enough for all too many years. It's totally inhumane to see the conditions for the people of Gaza. So I hope we can begin to mobilize a kind of humanitarian support, and that moving forward, hopefully, to some kind of acceptable political solution.
Thank you, Mr. Lykketoft, and an encouragement to everybody. If you have questions, just write them or raise your hand. Sam Bahour, I'll give you the chance to comment and to also answer the question on whether we should be concerned about the Trump plan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be able to speak to such a group, especially because Denmark is one of my favorite places. So I always like to accept Denmark invitations. A direct answer to your question, and then I'll expand a little bit from there, is yes, we should be worried when the sole superpower in the world has taken a decision to batter the Palestinians into submission based on a right-wing extremist Israeli agenda, adopting the agenda sink, line, and hook, as they say, and using the superpower posture and power to force feed it down Palestinians' throats. So that is a concern. Having said that, I'm one of probably the few people who actually read the Peace to Prosperity 181 pages multiple times. And you were, whoever said that the document is hollow in all the means of the term. First, as you noted, it's not an original document. It's cut and pasted from a series of documents that have all failed in history, and they failed for a reason over time. That the military occupation, the state of Israel, has not had the political will to allow a Palestinian state to emerge. Instead, they have been adamant about keeping a state of military occupation in place without calling it military occupation. So they have assumed that the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza may be slightly a different story, is part and parcel of Israel long before Trump came to office. And those successive agreements, parts of which we find in the Peace to Prosperity vision, failed not because there was not money, not because there was not expertise, not because the Palestinians don't want to better their environment that they live in. It's because that the power on the ground, the Israeli military, has made sure that the elements of development, and here we're talking economic development before anything else, were not permitted. So when Kushner and company, and I believe it should be said Friedman and company, because I think he was probably the architect who understands what's going on more so than even Kushner, developed this plan. It's a plan that failed in text. Having said that, the Israeli government today, this right-wing Israeli government, Netanyahu, has taken this plan, which he was part of producing, if not drafting, and has used it as a jumping board to get as much progress on his right-wing agenda that he could under this Trump window of opportunity for the Israelis. And that's where we saw the announcement of annexation. I call it another annexation because Israel has already annexed once in history, and they, if not more, and now they are annexing again. A very important point here, even though Netanyahu has full military power on the ground as an occupier, even though they have a window of opportunity with Trump in office to move forward any agenda item that they please, they still were not able to annex publicly the 30% that they intended to do. And we should be asking ourselves a question. If Trump was able to impose all of the things that he has imposed during the last 4 years, why was Netanyahu hesitant and actually took a step back in moving forward with another step, a key step for the Israeli side, which is to annex formally 30% of the West Bank. And the reason is we exist. All of us exist. And we are resisting. You in Denmark, me in Palestine, the refugee in Lebanon, Europe as the European Union and European states, we all pushed back. And resistance non-violently, I would agree with my colleague, works. Israel understood non-violently that there will be a cost politically, economically, culture-wise, sports-wise, etc., if they took a step forward and announced formally this annexation that they have in mind. Having said that, I'm living on the ground and can tell you, although he took a step back and has not announced it formally because the cost was too high, on the ground, with military might, annexation is happening every day. The creeping annexation, the individual acts of land confiscation, settlement building, house demolitions, road building, infrastructure expansion, all of this together is preparing the groundwork, not in talk, but on the ground, in reality, for annexation to happen in a near future, I would imagine. Now, let me just take one step back and just put all of this into context before I stop, which is, as we're looking at the episode of Trump, and as you so succinctly put together in your presentation, actually, when you look at the history of this conflict, Trump is less than a hiccup in the history of Palestine and Israel. And history will maybe make him a footnote, maybe. The issues here are much more serious and much more embedded in history and politics and so forth. And when I look at our history today, we have to make, each and every one of us and each state around the world has to make a decision in 2020. Are we for a rules-based world or a chaos-based world built on might is right? That decision to me is the starting point for us to have a conversation on the same grounds. You cannot tell me that you are for a rules-based world when it allowed the state of Israel to emerge and become a member state of the UN, but you are for a chaos-based world when it comes to following UN resolutions. That doesn't make sense to me. I can't play football and ping pong at the exact same time. I need to know what sport am I playing. Am I playing international law? If so, then the UN Charter, the International Court of Justice, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are my rules. If I'm playing a chaos-based world, which I don't know how to play in personally, that means bombings, shootings, stabbings, that's all fine. So we need to decide, are you okay with all of that violence, thinking that it will reach a political end? I'm not. So I've adopted international law with the right to resist as well. I don't diminish my right to resist. But like I tell my friends, I work on a third story of an office building. When the office day finishes, I have the right to use the stairs, to use the elevator, or jump out of the window to get to my car. I choose either the elevator or the stairs, even though I have the right to jump out of the window. So we need to choose carefully the tools that have impact. And I think our history has proven that the tools that we have on the diplomatic level, on the solidarity level, on the boycott, divestment, sanction level, are all tools that has had more impact on Israel than any stabbing or any shooting. We cannot beat Israel in its own game of military might. So there's no, and I'm not a pacifist, I'm not a Quaker. If I thought military might would liberate me, I would be asking you for donations for my first F-16. I don't think that will get a conclusion to my freedom and independence. What will is for me to be able to, and our movement, to be able to rally allies around the world, to link to solidarity movements around the world, to raise the cost of this occupation for Israel to come to its senses and end it. And we saw with the annexation bout that it works. So we just need to all double down on holding Israel accountable, and I think we'll find that there'll be a result at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. And I think you talked into some of the same elements, talking about the chaos-based world and the Palestine struggle being a domestic issue for the states that can veto anything, really kind of is hindering any real consequences for Israel, as we're seeing. So for me, what I see is it's difficult to play the go the diplomatic route, and rallying, having people demonstrating isn't having an effect. To be honest, like we have plenty of people that sympathize with the Palestinians, but one thing is the people, another thing is politicians. So that's why I was so excited to see the letter that was written to your colleagues, Mr. Lykketoft. A question from me about that letter is, has it had any impact? I am not aware of any impact. I haven't seen any replies, but maybe I didn't follow through. What I noticed that was really important was, and I've been a board member of Mellemfolkelig Samvirke, and we didn't dare talk about apartheid. But when you use words such as apartheid, which you say you don't use lightly, that's a really strong word. And I think in my opinion, it's about time we'd start using these words in politics as well. So a chance to comment, and that's the question. Yes.
Yes. I am not able to tell you that this has worked. I think we have to do anything we feel can have some impact in order to return to some kind of international order also around the question of Palestine. I totally agree with all what Sam said just before. I think to measure the impact of such kinds of resolutions is very difficult, particularly in time of the COVID crisis, where everybody's attention has turned internally, domestically. It's very, very difficult also for politicians in the first line to concentrate on one and more issue at a time. So what we will have to see is what comes after this. After it's no longer the COVID crisis at the top of mind, after we have seen a new American administration at place, because I think if we shall have impact, it's about involving much more of the general public in Europe and United States in what's the facts on the ground, what's the problems on the ground, what's the injustice playing out on the ground, and through that influencing national politicians both in Europe and particularly in Europe, and Europe maybe putting more weight to the United States in getting the new administration also to have a more balanced position in the questions of Palestine. But I don't think this is easy, because it was if it was easy, it would have been done long time ago, because it's obviously just and fair. So we are up against a formidable machine of propaganda for Israel, for the Israeli hardline, for the Israeli right wing, in each and every country in the West. Worst, of course, in the United States. You have figures like Adelson having power on the media in Israel, but also huge influence on the pictures of the situation in Israel-Palestine inside the United States. And we have this whole group of media conglomerates supporting Trump, which is also on the wrong side, so to say, in the whole discussion of what's going on and what's right. So it's a really hard fight also for good forces inside the American administration. So I wouldn't be that optimistic, but I think we will be able more or less to have a united front inside the European Union. There are dropouts also there in Eastern Europe, we all know that. But the major players here, I think, will work in the right direction. Joseph Borrell, as foreign representative for the European Union, is really on the right side. I'm more afraid about Britain. Britain has, in their very weak position now, after Brexit, an interest in pleasing the United States. So you can't expect the British government, so to say, to try to put pressure on the US. They will be more or less at the same position of every American government, but they will not be a force of support as they have been sometimes in the past. When I was foreign minister, Robin Cook was foreign minister of Britain, and he was a real friend of Palestine. He was a real friend of the just solution of the issue. I'm so sorry I can't give you a more optimistic analysis of the situation, but that's how the world is.
I'd rather have the reality.
You have less than ever a united Arab front to support Palestine, which is also a very, very sad development. As I mentioned, Mohammed bin Salman as the main problem here, but also Egypt is not at any help at all for the Palestinian cause, as I see it.
I don't know how you see it, Sam. You're living there. When I visited and talked with everyday people, the situation, what they all said, that they weren't counting on any Arab countries to come and save them at all. So the lack of unity between the Arab countries, I'm not sure how it's an issue. I'm not sure what can help the Palestinians. I believe in the EU having the power that they have, that they can pressure, because money speaks. That's what we've seen both with the partitioning plan. That's what we've seen that the Trump's peace plan is all about. And maybe Europe can pressure somehow, but it will take some time, I could imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. First, it's very clear to anyone following that the Palestinians have never put their hope in Arab governments, ever. Arab governments have always been non-representative, autocratic, dictatorial type governments. However, having said that, we know for a fact, because we are dispersed among them, that the Arab world's peoples have no question in their support to the Palestinian struggle for freedom and independence. That is something we can bet on. And that's something, although the region is in a very serious deterioration right now, 4 or 5 countries on the verge of collapse, if not already collapsed. So there are other priorities. However, overall, the Arab world is very clear. And the best example of that is Egypt. Although they did have a normalization step forward 20 years ago, they still do not have normalization amongst the peoples. Something different than what we're seeing today, for example, with the Emiratis. However, anybody who is excited about this normalization bonanza that we're seeing, it really only means that they're excited about a Middle East arms race. Mm-hmm. These are deals to be able to have the US and Israel to sell arms and security apparatus and surveillance apparatus to autocratic governments. If that excites you, then you have a different set of values than me. And I think we are in a realm of values, because you will find some people who say that's great. If we can sell more weapons to the Gulf, we have more jobs in the US. That equation to me is not a healthy equation for humanity. I would not diminish the acts of our minister or others, not only writing letters, but speaking out. Germany, for example, has gone on a witch hunt against anybody who is in support of Palestinians, to the point where they want to actually deliberate the word Palestinian, meaning anti-Semitism, so they can actually legislate against anyone who uses the word Palestine. 2 days ago, the leaders, or a group of leaders in the cultural and arts sector in Germany, after deliberating underground for like 2 years, these are German professional artists, came up and made their first public statement, which is saying enough is enough. We are allowed to be against military occupation. We are allowed to be critical of the state of Israel's politics without having to fear being tagged as anti-Semitic. This press conference that was held 2 days ago has created a rumble within the German society. So speaking out is important. I come from the US, and I can tell you that 25 years ago, if you told somebody that you were from Palestine, they would ask you 3 times, oh, where's Pakistan? And you had to explain to them where we are. Today, we have a Palestinian descendant sitting in Congress. We have a group of around 40 congressmen who are willing to put their name to a letter telling Israel you should not be abusing Palestinian children detainees. So the world is changing, even if we don't see it at the government level. But I believe, to be critical of our efforts, I believe that we all need to get more political. It's not enough to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. We have to convert that solidarity into political asks. And today, across the European countries, the political ask to start with, because we understand that we can't start with them holding Israel accountable like they should for many different reasons, the political ask is recognize the state of Palestine as 138 countries already have. It does not make sense for us, for any European country, to say, I'm for a 2-state solution, if they recognized Israel 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago and still can't find themselves to recognize the state of Palestine. That's a political ask, and I'm sure there's many more. I would point you, in ending here, to the report that came out about a week ago from the European Council for Foreign Relations, written by a friend researcher of mine, Hugh Lewitt. It's calling on the EU not to wait for a Biden administration to lead the world and find a way back to a peace process, but instead apply its leverage, and it has a lot of economic leverage on Israel, to bring back international law, the rule of order, into the relationship. The European Union and states, because we need to speak of them as 2 different things. It doesn't work that when we go to a state and we say recognize the state of Palestine in the European Union, they say, oh, but we don't have consensus in the European Union. And then we go to the European Union and we say, you don't recognize states, but can you acknowledge the Palestinian state? And they say, we can't do that because we don't have consensus among members. We don't want to play the ball in the football match. Each state has its own responsibility. And the European Union has embedded international law as part of its rules and regulations. We're only asking that they apply their own rules and regulations to Israel, starting economically, such as not allowing products made in settlements to be imported into the European Union as made in Israel.
So some tangible asks from Bahour, recognizing Palestine as a state, which Denmark can do definitely, and boycotting settlement goods. we invited you to participate for half an hour. If you need to go, please let us know. But otherwise, we do have a question from Mark, and I'll invite everybody to let me know. Also in Palestine, Rami, I can see you there. If anybody has some questions, please let us know. We have 2 hands raised, so okay, so we have 3 hands raised. Okay, so let's take the 3 questions and then take a round for answers. Let's start with Mark. I saw your hand first.
Thank you, Modi. Well, this is a very interesting talk that we've just been witnessing. Our organization, Stop Israeli Apartheid, actually has that ask that Mr. Sam Bahour he told us about, recognizing the state of Palestine. Now, maybe this question is for Mogens Lykketoft because he's the expert within Danish politics. We do not know how to get through to our government to actually put pressure on them. How do we pressure them into taking the stand with just recognizing Palestine, or even go a bit further and condemning the acts of the Israelis?
Thank you, Mark. I'll move on to Dalia, and I'll sum up the questions. I promise that.
Yes, thank you everyone for this talk. So it's more a comment than a question. I see a tendency between all speakers that I respect and love all of them about like pressure on EU and stuff like that, which I really see very sensible. But like, doesn't this reinforce again the white hero dynamic? You know, like Palestinians need the white heroes to be helped. Why can't we think of things like more grassrooting or connecting to the global south or to countries in, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to think of different dynamics without this need for a white hero to save Palestinians again.
I appreciate it, Dalia, and I'll invite you to join our next session about activism. I know Benjamin, who's a speaker there, is head of Solidarity Rising, which is about cross-border solidarity. But your comment has been noted. Ramiz, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much for the comprehensive presentation. I have a specific question to Mr. Lykketoft. So you claim that the Palestinians should be unified in order to basically to counter the settler colonial policies that Israel is implementing, and I fully support this. But like, don't you think I actually would disagree with Dali on this point? But like, we can see that the EU and also the UN and like specifically only condemns Israel. When do you think like the EU and the UN would take effective measures, like for example imposing sanctions, boycotting, or even like as the first question recognizing Palestine? What will take the EU to finally step up and recognize Palestine as a result of these policies, since we know condemnation does not do any effective measures to actually enhance the situation of Palestine? Thank you.
Thank you for all the questions. If anybody has some more questions, raise your hand or write them in the chat. But to sum up the question from Mark, and mostly for Mogens Lykketoft, but maybe also for Sam, you have some experience with the political game. How do we get through to our government? In our case, in Denmark, what measures can we take to make them recognize Palestine as a state? And then there was the white savior complex as a comment. Why not connecting to the global? The final question is, why don't we take more effective measures? Why only condemnations and resolutions? We have seen in the past that they have no effect whatsoever. Well, that may be a tiny bit harsh, but maybe Mogens Lykketoft, maybe you will start.
Yes, and I'm afraid I this because I'm receiving a guest in a moment. But let me say, for one thing, I have been arguing in the mystic political scene of Denmark for the last 20 years the same way Sam is arguing. I think you know that, those of you who have been living here in Denmark. And we were actually, I think, more than 10 years ago, three former foreign ministers calling for the full diplomatic recognition of Israel, of Palestine. It's not happened. Even inside my own party, there are probably different views. You often hear the argument it's not a functioning state, it don't exercise control, so we can't give it full diplomatic recognition. My argument is the opposite. This is a necessary political declaration in order, and it should be for every member state of the United Nations, because Israel is actually the only country in the United Nations established through a decision in the United Nations. But that decision also implied the construction of a Palestinian state. And that's the reason why we should do that. One of all the good reasons, because this is actually about mobilizing public understanding about the realities of the situation. And the question from Ramos about putting more pressure, not only declarations, is also a problem of mobilizing sufficient popular support for this. So I will continue as long as I can to try to connect with as many people as possible, both in Denmark and outside in Europe, in order to increase that pressure. And say in any discussion about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it is not reasonable to argue that this should be solved in negotiations between the two parties, because the two parties are so unequal in power that you can't imagine it. The only way it can be solved is through outside pressure on the strong part, on Israel. Again, I'm sorry to recognize how short we have come in all these years, and how difficult it is to keep the attention on the Palestinian issue in the public debate, internationally and nationally. Let me give you another observation as my final remarks here from my time as President of the United Nations General Assembly. One of the most moving situations we had during that year was the circumstances around the decision to raise the flag of Palestine in the United Nations. And that took place as a ceremony where people were actually packing together and trying to come as close as possible from all the, not all, but most of the delegations. What does that mean? That means that inside the United Nations, you have, and particularly among the G77, that means the organization of the southern of the southern part of the world, the poorer part of the world, inside the UN, you have a very, very strong support for Palestine. Maybe not really among all governments, but all governments know that there is a strong popular support in most of those countries for Palestine. And I think also you should try as far as possible to build on that also. I can mention a very, in a way, interesting and uplifting the situation I observed last time I was in the UN General Assembly to speak together with other former presidents of the General Assembly. It was that my good friend, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, is now the spokesman for G77 in the General Assembly. And that's also kind of of expression of the fact that there is a lot of depression you can have along Palestine, about Palestine, but there's also much to build on in the southern part of the world, as was asked for from Dalia. I'm sorry to leave you now, but hopefully we can return to a discussion where we have seen some progress in between. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much.
A round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam, if I don't know how your time is, but
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments as well, if possible, just from what I heard.
please.
I want to follow up on the previous upbeat discussion. There's a lot to be upbeat about, and not in the short term, not last week, not today, not last 2 weeks ago when there were several house demolitions, but in the historical context, as you properly laid out. We as Palestinians should not be here. The forces of the world calculatedly tried to systematically destroy us as a people in its entirety. We have come back from almost total obliteration in 1948 and in 1967 to not only exist, but to impose our existence in the body of the UN with recognition of 138 countries, on and on and on. I can make the example. So that the sheer fact of our ability to come and emerge as a nation, as a people, unified in concept, if not in geography, is an amazing achievement that we should not just throw behind us as something minor. Having said that, I understand totally the frustration. I share the frustration of not being able to get enough traction today in 2020 to get states to act, to be able to work with us in ending this disaster, human-made disaster that we're living. I agree with Dalia, I believe her name was Dalia. Thank you for your question. When I speak of the EU and the US and others, it's not because I am seeking their savior. I know very well that they're on the wrong side of history, not only as it relates to Palestine, but for many of them, and in my mind is Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, their own histories have issues that are relevant to Israel's form of existence. So they will always have an issue by holding Israel accountable, because it would mean that they would be holding themselves accountable. However, the world is organized around state formations, whether we like that or not. And because that's the way the world is organized, we have no option but to engage ourselves with not only individual states, but the state groupings, like the Arab League, like the EU, like the Organization of African Countries, etc. That's at the political level, but at the diplomatic level. However, our strength is not there. Our strength is exactly where you alluded to. It is in the South, it is in with the developing world, it's in the Arab populations, it's where we have gained our traction to be able to remain standing as a people. And we will never throw that out of the equation, just the opposite. We are today, as things are very, very difficult, embedding ourselves even more in other social movements, in relational kind of movements, like in the States, whether it's the women's movement or Hispanic movement, minority movement, workers movement. All of those have a relationship to us being part and parcel of them to be able to gain their solidarity. So I agree with you. There will be no white horse coming from Europe to liberate Palestine. And I would end by saying, in order for those states to act like we want them to, and I would even go further and say, in order to get the solidarity movement to have more impact wherever they are, I would not say that we have to have unity in the perfect sense. We have to have a sound leadership with a coherent policy to be able to move forward, and to hold those countries who are not acting under international law accountable. What do I mean? When a state in 2020 does not want to recognize the state of Palestine, am I not fair to ask why is that state allowed to have a representative office in Ramallah and be privy to all of the internal Palestinian discussions? And I actually made an open letter to the Palestinian president about a year and a half ago and basically said, if we're serious about statehood, we should make it have a cost. States, and I'm speaking here mostly of European states, including the US, if you do not recognize the state of Palestine by 1/1/2021, for example, we kindly ask you to close your office in Palestine and go back and sit in your capital until you come to your senses. And for those countries that do recognize the state of Palestine, we not only welcome you, but we want to find all the different kinds of cooperation possible to make our partnership valuable. That requires political leadership. We don't have that today. And I'll actually end by putting in the chat that open letter that you might be interested in reading, because I do think that we have an internal challenge, but I'm not looking for US style or European style unity, assuming there is that, given the US is split into two and Europe is split into 22 and British and I mean, there is no unity in that sense. What we're talking about is proper representation and a coherent political strategy. Let's remember, when Nelson Mandela led the ANC to end South African apartheid, the movement in South Africa was not unified, but there was a dominant player called the ANC with proper leadership. So having plurality is not a bad thing. The more unity, the more coherence there is in the political system, the better. But to wait for all Palestinians to have the same political opinion or all political parties to be on the same track is waiting for Godot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I will be looking forward to reading the letter and the report that you also sent. I appreciate that very much. It's a very valid point that you made at the end. We hear a lot that we need unity in order to succeed, but what we really need is leadership. It doesn't look like we have too many questions left. So the question to all of you right now is who is willing to go into discussions? So we could see if we should create discussions group. I have some ready, but I also know that it's close to dinner time.
Mahmoud, before I exit, can I ask my own question?
Please go ahead, please.
Is everybody okay if I take a screenshot and make a Facebook post about this event? All right. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Whoever wants to be in the picture, put your
You need a
picture.
new picture. You need a new picture.
Whoever
Yes.
wants to be in the picture, come on board.
Yeah, please do so, Sam. And also on next Saturday, the 19th, we want to continue the discussion on how to bring this activism forward. And I think for this, Dalia's comment was also very interesting with the South-South grassroots perspective.
Absolutely.
But okay, photo
Picture
time.
on 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Great to be with everyone. Have a good meeting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
So we are still we are still 20 participants. Usually what we see when we break out into groups that some people go, but so I'll give it an opportunity for everybody who have something else to attend and who was only interested in the Q&A to leave now. All is good. But for everybody who wants to participate in a discussion about what we can do politically, please hang on and I will send links to the breakout groups.
Jeg skal bare sige, jeg skal hen og lave mad til ungerne.
Velbekomme, Mark.
Det var hyggeligt at møde. Se jer alle sammen. Tak for mødet.
Yes. So maybe we'll make 3 groups. One group will stay here, and then 2 other groups. Does that sound?
Sounds great. Maybe we should. I don't know if it makes sense to break up into an Arabic group, a Danish group, and an English group. Or how would you suggest, Marie?
Yeah, at least, yeah, maybe just one in Arabic and one in
Well,
English.
we are only 10 now.
Yeah, exactly. So this the people who stay is the Arabic, and the people who leave is the.
No, not only Arabic. We have.
Yeah, but we can make a breakout room in English if you send a link over.
Yes, the link is coming.
Mahmoud, what I think, every time in the split group we have a problem because many people can't manage to. I don't know, if we are 10, what do you think? 2 groups or we stay?
I think we will make. Well, we will make one group. So some people stay here and others go to the other group, and maybe we could have them. I don't know if it makes sense to have it based on language. Maybe it should be based on topics. But we have a group here, and I think we should settle for English in both groups. I think everybody who was participating throughout this was fine with English. So
Yes.
the group I have right now that I've linked in the chat is a group where we will discuss what measures we can take in Denmark, maybe. Marie, I'm looking at you, kind of.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Great. And
so I will go to that group, and then maybe if a few other people will come join in the other group, and you will stay some few people here.
Great. I will stay here, and we'll probably discuss somewhat the same. Okay, I'm afraid that I'm afraid that only Marie left to the other group. So maybe she'll come back. I can see that she's the only one that left. We could start here. There's Rames, you have your hand raised, so please kickstart.
Yeah, could you elaborate more on what we're going to do now? Because it's a bit confusing. I still have no idea what we're going to do.
I understand the confusion. I haven't been full clear. The idea is that we could discuss what the takeaways from the Q&A with Sam Bahour and Mogens Lykketoft were, and maybe translate it to something tangible. So what can we do with whatever organizations or values that we represent? So I'll start with asking you what you found most interesting in what was said.
Me, or are you asking in general?
Yes, I'm asking you maybe we should go another route.
Yeah, I can.
Your question.
Okay, so there are different stuff. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you guys know it, but I study international law and human rights. So I'm a bit familiar with the context of what is happening in Palestine, and I have a very in-depth and comprehensive understanding of the legal situation of Palestine. Now, I think this discussion was very interesting in the sense that one, it provided different explanations and provided different perspectives, especially coming from someone who used to be, I think, the president of the General Assembly. I'm not fully sure. I'm not fully clear on this. But anyways, I think it was very interesting. In terms of, I think the main question that we should start thinking about is what we should do now. Like, since we have this problem of Israel being a settler colonial state. They're implementing a lot of policies that discriminate against Palestinians. They're taking lands. There's no backlash or retaliation either from the Palestinian Authority, because the PA is not doing much, but also we have to look at the international community, because the international community is also not doing much. So I think we as Palestinians, and also as like the Danish community, or any person who believes in the Palestinian cause, we should start thinking about how we could incentivize states to, especially states, because the states and politics are the key players. So we need to influence them in a sense. I know that it is a difficult process, but I think as what Dalia had mentioned earlier, like a grassroots and the civil society is very important in this case, because if we actually influence the civil society members, by civil society I mean NGOs, human rights organizations, to start shedding light on the circumstances and the situation on Palestine, it could influence a lot. Because I'm not very familiar with the Danish perspective of Palestine and Israel, but I've been to a lot of European countries, and most people do not have a clear image of what is happening in Palestine, because Palestine is considered a taboo subject in a sense, because anyone who supports Palestine is considered anti-Semitic, in support of Zionism. So we need as people to change this perspective in order to have more collaboration, to have more support. Anyways, I think that's it. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I appreciate it. I'll say though, I don't fully recognize the picture you painted about Palestine being such a taboo. I think it is sometimes, but what also plays a role is that unfortunately people are getting bored with the subject, and it's easy to take the lazy approach and say that it's complex. It's been in the newspapers since before I was born, so the youth that you will meet probably will have heard about it ever since they were a couple, like ever since they could understand anything really. But I agree with you in that it might be tabooish some places and sometimes. Please go ahead. I can see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just want to clarify what I mean exactly by taboo. So I've interacted with a lot of people from different countries, specifically from European countries, because I recognize like the Holocaust plays a prominent role in European history, and we, of course, as Palestinians, we sympathize and also empathize with the Holocaust, with the Jewish people. So we need to realize that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not about Judaism; it's more about Zionism. Now, as you know, Zionism is a very radical ideology that basically enforces this idea of systematically discriminating against Palestinians. So we have to clarify this. So what I mean by taboo is that a lot of people think that because of this influence, because of the idea that Palestine, if you're with Palestine, then you're somehow against Judaism, which is a misconception, a major misconception. So I think by taboo, we need to change this. We need to affirm that the support of Palestine is not necessarily saying that you're against Judaism. It's not about this. It's not about religion. It's not about hating people. It's more about advocating for the self-determination of Palestinians. So, and I have met a lot of people, and I can assure you that a lot of people think that supporting Palestine equals or is in parallel with being anti-Semitic. So I say that we should change these misconceptions. I'm not fully sure about Denmark, because I have not interacted with a lot of Danish people, but I've been to a lot of states, and specifically Germany, because I have a lot of context in Germany. So I would say that talking about Palestine is not very, as I said, it's considered a taboo subject in a sense. So we should make sure that we change this misconception about the discussion of Palestine.
I agree. For everybody that feels it's a taboo, it's something that we need to address and work on. Is there anybody who has some comments? Anybody who can recognize this? Anybody who have worked with?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, Mahmoud, you were talking about like the Palestinian issue or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not anymore in the news, or maybe people see the news and they skip it. They don't read it because it has been for so many years. Like exactly what's going on now about the wall. It has been for 20 years, the separation wall. Yeah, it has been for 20 years, so it's not anymore in the news. And after the World of Hotel was built by the graffiti artist, what's his name? What's his name?
Banksy?
Banksy, yeah, Banksy. So the separation wall was back to be in the news because Banksy started to paint on the wall. I mean, we can use different ways to make the Palestinian issue back to the news, back to the international opinion. But I mean, not just in politics, maybe also there are so many other ways. Maybe artists around the world.
I must admit I'm not that optimistic about the use of media for raising awareness. It's clear to me in Denmark that I can't recognize the picture that they paint. An example is the right of return march in Gaza during the same time when Trump moved the embassy. The news in Denmark were belittling the amounts of deaths that were in Gaza, and there was like this, we don't understand what they're marching for. I believe in grassroots, and I believe in taking political measures and economical measures if you are in such position. But in Denmark, I don't know if anybody sees something else in Denmark, but I don't think that the media really can move opinion so much. I think the people that are following the Palestine-Israel issue have already decided what they feel about it. That something really radical need to happen for people to change their opinions. And those who are not following have also made an active choice not to really follow the news because it's too far away. Maybe it's too complex. I don't know. Any other thoughts or comments? I feel I'm still Q&A-ing everybody.
Yeah. And also we lost so many of the participants.
Well, it is in this COVID
Whenever
time.
we split to groups, we lose people.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It really is. But we had a good session today. Maybe it's this means that we should wrap up. Thank you everybody who have joined. I hope that it was worth your time. I definitely got some new info, and we will share the slides for those interested. I got a comment about that. And the recording is available on request as well for those who didn't see the entire thing. Thank you to all of you and enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Bye.